No.
Yes.
Fresh back here on the front.
This happened at dinner on Saturday. Now we're working for now. We'll try. Hi, welcome to the evening's talk by the History and Artifacts Committee. All right, we'll do the same thing we did on Saturday night and wait for a new microphone. All right, it's hard for me to tell sometimes when it's working and when it's not. My name is Walt Johnson. I'm the club historian, if you haven't met me before. And I'm here with the fellow members of the History and Artifacts Committee. And a ghost. Well, now we know this is it must be the microphone, yeah. Right. The fellow members of the History and Artifacts Committee under Will Deeby's leadership here, and we're going to be each taking a turn speaking, so you'll hear who they are when we get up to talk. We'll have 6 speakers. The first few are focused on the actual history of the club from its early days, and then the last couple we're going to be talking about some of the artifacts that we have, taking a look at what we do with some of the artifacts, and we'll finish up with a discussion, presentation on how that can be accessed digitally. We have a digital presence that you might be interested in exploring, and our expert on that will also be talking. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker, Jim Snow, who will be telling us about the founding of the Corinthian Yacht Club of San Francisco.
Thank you, Walt. Haven't had one of these in my hand for a long time. Those are the original guys right there. And this all began in 1886, spring of 1886. And a group of young boat sailors. And basically, well, there was the San Francisco Yacht Club and the Pacific Yacht Club. San Francisco being over there across the pond. Sausalito, or the Pacific, was in Sausalito, like we call it Hurricane Gulch, down in that neighborhood. And I'm going to ditch this thing if it keeps talking to me. I figure you can all hear me. So there was a group of small boat sailors that were pretty much dissatisfied with the present arrangement of how things were run on the water, race-wise, regatta-wise, to form their own yacht club, basically. And you know, and the small boat fellows, they were pretty proud of the fact that they were self-reliant, maintained and skippered their own boats, and you know, they were energetic, and of course loved the waters here that we look at today. This led off to their dissatisfaction led to the fact that they decided to form their own yacht club. They were going to split because they were being ignored. And they formed their committees. They had their first meetings, and this is like in the spring of 1886, and the main spokesman for the group was a fellow named Joe Tracy, and there was a group of guys with him, and they met at Alarian Hall in San Francisco. And I always get a kind of kick out of this because the Alarian Hall was basically a downstairs room in a German beer hall. And the guy named, it was called Harry's Bar, and this is where they met, and this is where things got started. And so they appointed their committees. You know, again, Joe Tracy was the ringleader on all of this. And they had a committee for the bylaws. They had a committee to nominate their officers, and a committee to suggest a name for the new yacht club. So this went on for a while, and of course, the second meeting, in April of that year, 1886, they had, everybody had made their reports. The bylaws committee submitted their draft, and probably the most significant thing in the bylaws draft was there was not to be any boat that exceeded 45 feet in length to be a member of this new yacht club. So, and then the nominating committee, they came in there. They had a guy, they nominated a fellow named William Moody, whose picture's downstairs, the Rose Gallery down there. You know, there's a lot of these guys' photos are down there. He was nominated to be the Commodore. The bylaws were accepted, and the naming committee suggested the name Corinthian, and this is where my little introduction steps off and gets off into the actual forming of the club and what the name Corinthian actually means. So with that, the head of our group here, Will, he's going to lead us off on that. And without the microphone, are you able to hear me okay? Yeah, because sometimes this gets to be a distraction. We're not a professional. Will, come on up over here. And okay, and
the microphone.
There it is.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Corinthian. What does that mean? Why did they name the club the Corinthian? Well, Corinthian really means a resident of the city of Corinth in Greece. That's what it really means. But it seems that in Corinth, back in Greece, they used to have games. This is probably to rival their sister city, Athens, who had the Olympic Games. So the Corinthian Games were said to be second only to the Olympic Games, whatever they were. But Corinthian Games meaning they are open to what? To amateurs. So somehow the name Corinthian became associated with the word amateur. In fact, it became a synonym for the word amateur. And in this country, about that same time, in the late 1800s, there was what some people call the Corinthian movement. Now, what was that? Well, the Corinthian movement was a movement against professionalism in sailing. Now, sailing at that time, late 1800s, was usually some wealthy guy who owned a big boat, and he hired crew to crew it for him, something like an 80-foot schooner. And the Corinthian movement was a resistance against this professionalism in sailing, the promotion of amateurism. Well, this was a big thing back in the late 1880s, and it seems that it really started in England with the formation of a yacht club called the Corinthian Yacht Club. That club is still there. It's now known as the Royal Corinthian Yacht Club. That was some early 1870s. And shortly after that, in this country, a yacht club in New York called the Sewanaka Yacht Club, an Indian name, I guess, changed its name to the Sewanaka Corinthian Yacht Club, indicating, of course, that they were amateur sailors. Not long after that, in 1885, I believe it was, a club called the Corinthian Yacht Club was formed in Marblehead, Massachusetts. This was virtually the same story that Jim just told you about our club. They, instead of that, they had two yacht clubs there that were having a problem with professionalism, the Boston Yacht Club and the Eastern Yacht Club. So that was summer of 1885. Well, in the spring of 1886, our club was formed, and in resistance to some of the professionalism, the big boat sailors having their hired crews here in the San Francisco Yacht Club and probably the Pacific Yacht Club as well, we were named the Corinthian. As part of the Corinthian movement. Now there's been quite a number of clubs with the same name for the same reason. There's a Corinthian Yacht Club of Philadelphia, for example. There was a Corinthian Yacht Club of Washington, D.C. There was a Corinthian Yacht Club of Marblehead, Massachusetts. No, not Marblehead. Point, I forget the name of it, but in New Jersey. All of these formed shortly after this Corinthian movement started in the late 1880s, early 1890s. So that's where we are. We're the Corinthian Yacht Club. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom. Tom, are you here?
All right.
Okay, there we go.
Bravo.
Here in a glass of wine.
So as we know, as we get older, things change. And the Corinthian is no exception to that. Where we're sitting now is not what the original, it's where the original Corinthian club was, but this is not the original clubhouse, as Diana will discuss. The island behind us was not Corinthian Island, it was Valentine Island. And the first clubhouse was based right on the spot, and it was owned by, the island was owned by a guy named Thomas Valentine. So when we decided that we wanted to be here, a number of things happened. They extended a 5-year lease at $12 a month, and we paid the first year in advance of $60. The members, this was obviously before Olivia Sue Decker got here. The members actually blasted out the end of this island to create some space, for the clubhouse. So let's take a look at what happened. So the first clubhouse, not only did they blast out some of the rock, they built the clubhouse and finished it in time for opening day in 1887. At that time, it was only accessible by way of water until they built a path from Main Street. The first clubhouse, not only, one thing that really made it stand out was it was painted red. So that helped it stand. Again, this is before the Planning Commission was here. The first revision was they added a front deck. What we saw earlier was this, and they added this with stairs and a stairwell to the main room. And they also added the boathouse, which is really still in existence. It's where we have our dry storage. And then the second revision was they added Pneumonia Alley. Whoops. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. There we go. So there we have Pneumonia Alley. There we have the boathouse. This is, it's where we are now, but it was something different. And there was the side, and so you could get a sense of stuff. There's Belvedere over there. There's Valentine Island over there. And by the way, we'll get into more detail about that change from Valentine Island to Corinthian Island. And when they did this, they put lockers in there. We had the storage, and it's known as Pneumonia Alley. The lockers, for quite a number of folks that I learned when we were interviewing old members, it was sort of a barracks as well, because a lot of our members lived over in the city, and when they would come over for the weekend and actually sleep in there, and during the Prohibition, keep their hooch there. So anyway, and then they took the main room, where, again, not where we are now, but they did have a main room, and this is what it looked like. It was set up for the annual dinner on New Year's Eve in 1899. And then they really started to get fancy. They enlarged the main room and made it in the Jinx room. There weren't women members allowed at that time, so Jinx were sort of, I guess, part of the deal. And when they did that, they added a stage, not this one, but they added a stage and dressing rooms, and they built it at a cost of $925. And again, finished it before opening day, and they pulled a line from the rail yard. I don't know if it was legally done or not, but they got some juice from the rail yard, and that's how they were able to light this. And this is what they did with the stage. This was an original farce, Hot Time in the Cooler, and this is opening day Jinx. And as they used to do the creation of the Bohemian Club, same sort of deal. Men played women and men in all the roles. And then in the room now, just to give you sort of an idea, again, it's not this room, but if we were in it now, our stage would be over here. This would be sort of on the west side. And as you can see, everyone dressed up and acted like gentlemen. And with that, I'm going to pass this on to Diana, who will get into the construction and where we are today in this clubhouse.
All right, as you've learned from Tom, when we went on our month-to-month lease back in 1891, it presented a problem for us because we were the fastest growing yacht club in the Bay Area here. San Francisco had about 120 members. The Pacific Yacht Club had about 100 members. And Corinthian, by 1891, had 175 members. One of the fun things that we get to do as a History and Artifacts Committee is go through a lot of original newspaper articles, magazine articles, and when you go and read some of these things, you find the language fascinating. Very often, we'll be picking up something, one of us, and read it, and just have to share it with everybody. We all get distracted by it, because it's so interesting the way they phrase things. So I am going to read to you, according to the Yachts and Yachtsmen of America magazine, the ground on the clubhouse is on, being only leased, and now running from month to month, the club does not feel like making any vast improvements in addition to the present quarters. A committee on location is now looking up a suitable site for the building of a new club and boathouses. The club owes its success to the fact that only boats under 45 feet in overall length were admitted. The club, besides having numerous ways of amusing its guests, makes it a point to have an annual dinner from 75 to 125 members, and they're all sitting at the same table. What I find fascinating about this is that here we were the fastest growing yacht club because of a major change that will explain to you the Corinthian movement. People were working on their own boats, building their own boats from keel up. And this is why Corinthian, and now you look at it, I mean, this is yacht clubs of what they are today. So what happened at this time? We were just growing and we needed new space. So the Commodores at the time sent everybody out trying to find new locations. In fact, they went down to China Camp down here and they were looking for new locations, but none of that ever came to any fruition. So in 1896, as you learned, Thomas Valentine passed away and left the property to his wife, Jenny, who was no different. She wouldn't give us a long-term lease. But an article in the San Francisco Examiner on August 8th, 1903, there was a big headline. Oops, I'm supposed to... I forgot this last time, so I'm going to... Higher on the mic. Oh, thank you. Good. I'm trying to get to my pictures. Walt. Down. I'm hitting down arrow. Oops. Mic down. Uh-oh. See, I forgot last time to show you all this cool stuff, and now I remember. Well, anyway, this article, which we'll have a picture of maybe in a moment, another thing, I just get fascinated by reading some of this stuff. But what they claimed was that Jenny Valentine sold the island. And they sold it to a group of unknown investors, and it was headed up by this attorney named Henry Diamond. And their plan was to turn this entire island in something to rival San Diego and the Del Coronado. They wanted to make it a big, spectacular 200-room hotel room thing with 3 stories high with grand gardens and all of this. And this was what the Examiner reported. Well, as we know, that did not happen, thank goodness. And kind of things went along a little bit. And one of the things that in this article that I have to share is a quote. "The only regret is that we shall have to disturb the Corinthians in their nest by the water." The article closes with a picturesque clubhouse in and about which the Corinthians have made merry in years past is doomed to destruction. So none of that happened, and we kind of just went along and never did move and all of that, but we never made vast improvements to the clubs except for the ones that Tom explained to you. Then in late 1907, they began, whoops, I forgot a little key part here. She finally did decide to sell the island. She sold it to a group of local brothers here, the Kelly brothers, and they decided they too were going to build a big fancy hotel. Well, when they looked at the finances of it, they finally decided they were going to actually sublet it. And once we found, the Corinthians found that they were going to sublet it, they decided they wanted to try to buy our property. So the group of investors named themselves, and they formed the Corinthian Island Company, and then they subdivided the island. In 1907, they began selling lots, and they changed the name of Valentine Island to Corinthian Island after the Corinthian Yacht Club. So one didn't get the other. We started, this is us, right here. And this Corinthian Land Company by the Kelly brothers is really what started it. So on August 11th, 1908, the club was able to purchase its property, and they paid, to your remarks, Tom, $4,000. Oh, here, good. Oh, thank you. He's doing this for me. So we paid $4,000 for it, and it was actually secured with a $400 gold piece. So that was back in those days. So the threat of moving was over. A Commodore William Hogg we have Peter Hogg, who's a Commodore in recent history here, but this is a relation. He held a meeting in December of 1910. An architect was engaged and funding was discussed. It was decided to raise funds by raising the dues and creating a special building fund. So they had further meetings and more discussions, and finally the plans were drawn up by, I'll get it, James Miller. And he was an architect in San Francisco, as everyone, they all lived in San Francisco at the time. So they talked about building this fund and creating the dues, but then they figured out they still needed to incur debt of about $10,000, so they got a mortgage of $10,000. In an article published by the Sausalito News in 1911, CYC had not only raised the dues for a special fund, but members signified their willingness to pay the $50 assessment all at once rather than in installments, so that the $10,000 indebtedness could be ready to go to get the building going, which is really amazing. They all stepped up and did this. So we have a copy of the final plans that were drawn up by the architect, and he was also a member of the club. It's over here. These plans over here, when you get a chance, these are the original plans from 1911. We still have them, and you'll see where you're at here. This is the Jinx Room. We're probably the only club that I'm aware of that has actually such a stage. But part of our makeup, part of our history, is that we were always involved in entertainment and Jinx. And then somehow this was a Corinthian thing we did from the very beginning. And since then we've done Broadway shows, we've had opera nights, we've had all kinds of entertainment that still continued on using this very stage. So this room is the Jinx Room, and he envisioned a paneled, it's all in the plans and all in the history of this. All this wood here is this is all original to 1912. So it was, the Little Red Clubhouse was torn down. You've read everywhere, in the Landmark Society, in the PICYA publications, in our own publications. This has been thoroughly researched and discovered. There was no fire at the Corinthian Yacht Club. It did not burn. The great fire that everyone was speaking of, Walt did a lot of research on this, was the 1906 fire earthquake in San Francisco. Remember, all our members lived over there. We had no paper here. You know, it was all in their offices, and that's where a lot of our records were destroyed, the fires of 1906 in San Francisco. So the Little Red Clubhouse had to be torn down to make room for this building. It was completed in May of 1912. They had a gala dedication, which was held on the 4th of July, and in a local newspaper, again, the opening day has been an informal affair by the directors of the club. No invitations have been issued to anyone, the word having been passed around to yachtsmen that all are welcome. No invitation is necessary, and the Corinthian Yacht Club Reception Committee will be on hand to welcome all friends of the club that care to put in an appearance. All visitors will be entertained in a truly Corinthian style and spirit. So we've been known for this forever, our friendly atmosphere and our demeanor. And I hope you do get a chance to take a look at all these, because the slides here, but a lot of these we found in our archives, and some of them you're going to find in a great state of disrepair. This is one of the things the History and Artifacts Committee does, is try to find the old pictures so we can, I think Mike will cover this next, but hopefully to find old negatives and things that we can enhance this and make them more presentable. But this is part of what the Artifacts and History Committee does, is try to improve on all those things. So the mortgage, by the way, the $10,000 mortgage, was ceremoniously burned in 1914 after the debt was paid off. So right now what I'd like to do is introduce to you our club historian once again, Walt Johnson.
Bravo!
Thank you, Diana. That completes the first portion of the program where we're talking about the actual history of the club. I'm going to take a moment here to look into one of the interesting artifacts we've recently been exploring. And I will credit the Landmark Society. They had, I discovered in their archives, or it was discovered and shown to me, this wonderful program from the 1899 opening day of the Yacht Club of Corinthian. It's a 72-page glossy paper production. I don't know how many they printed, but it's pretty fancy. So inspired by that, I came back here and said, don't we have one of these somewhere? And it turns out we did. In Diana's box of cool things that she has. I want to walk through just some of the highlights of this, just to give you an idea of the kinds of explorations, the kinds of things we can do with the artifacts that we have in our collection. This is the cover page, not a brilliant color reproduction. This is from my scanner, but pretty fancy kind of artwork, custom artwork and stuff they have on this thing. This is the title page. Opening day was on April 22nd in 1899. As we saw earlier in Tom's presentation, this is what the clubhouse looked like in 1899. They were still constrained by the original small building that had been there for about 15 years. They'd expanded the boathouse and other things, and in 1900, they would take one of their Jinx performances to San Francisco, sell tickets to the public, and raise $900 that way. They threw in $25 of their own and got them to the $925 they needed to do the theater expansion and to make the room bigger in 1900. So this is on the cusp of that event with the final expansion of the old clubhouse. To put some faces to the names that you've heard, I thought it might be interesting to look. This is the board of directors in 1899. We have the Commodore here, Carl Westerfeld was the Commodore. His brother Willie was also a member. We may have encountered the Keefe clock downstairs in the bar. This is John Keefe, Boss Keefe as he was known. He was port captain here for 20 years or something like that. Other important people we have, other people who became Commodores. Eddie Sager, Will Tepke. This is Irving Lyons, who owned Frida in those days. Charlie Barrett and Tom Miller, who were all members of the board. We also have pictures of all of the historic Commodores up to 1899. You heard Joe Tracy. Theodore Tracy was his real name. He always went by Joe. Our founding Commodore, this is William Moody, our first Commodore. Other important names you may recognize. Louis Chapman was our second Commodore. John Pugh, who for many years, he was Commodore 3 years, two together, then for the third year later. He lived in the cool pagoda house over on Belvedere Island here. He eventually was president of the Union Fish Company when it operated on the other side, on the west side of Belvedere Island. As he was a big mover in the club. Alex Young over here was a Commodore, one of the early Commodores. Who else we got? Billings, all these guys. By the way, if you're curious about who these folks are, a little bit in their history, I've written biographies of all of these people, and they are all available on our website. And we're going to talk about digital access to the production that we've had and the other sorts of scans of materials, including this book, that are available on the web. And Mike will be talking about that next.
Johnson up there.
Yes, there is a Johnson. I'm no relation. In fact, my family's name was not Johnson at this time. It didn't become Johnson until the 1930s. Now, here's some of the other key members, and you can tell from the size and the way they've ranked this page, the Jinx Committee is clearly more important than the Regatta Committee. So, there were more guys up here working on the Jinx than there were working on the Regattas. Recognize some of the same names. Who do we have? Oh, this is Harry Hawks, who later became a Commodore. Doogie Erskine, Scotsman, who wrote, he went by Doogie, it's a Scotch way of saying Douglas, or nickname for Douglas. He was a columnist for, sports writer, I think for the Examiner. One of the reasons why we had great coverage of Corinthian events in the newspapers was because all of the papers had reporters dedicated to covering yachting activities, and a couple of them were members of our club. And we would always make sure to invite them all to things like opening day or the annual dinner and other things like that. So that was a big deal. One interesting character